Welcome to Sleepy Beep. Settle in. Let your shoulders drop a little further than they already have. There is nothing you need to do tonight, nothing to solve, nowhere you have to be. Just let the sound of this voice be a soft place to rest while the room goes quiet around you. I want to tell you about a house and a light and a woman who was made to doubt her own eyes. It is the year 1938, and a playwright named Patrick Hamilton has just written something that will quietly slip into the way we talk for the next 100 years, though almost no one who uses the word will remember where it came from. The play is called Gaslight. Picture the stage. Picture a London townhouse in the dark Victorian style, all heavy curtains and gas lamps on the walls, the kind that hiss faintly and throw a warm, uneven glow over everything. And picture a marriage inside it. Each evening after his wife has settled, the husband slips away upstairs to do something he does not want her to know about. And when he lights the lamps up there, something happens to the lamps everywhere else in the house. The gas, you see, all comes from the same supply. So when he turns up the flame in one room, the flames in the others go dim. The lights in the parlor where she sits sink lower. The shadows lean in closer. And she notices, of course she notices, because she is sitting right there watching the light fade in front of her. So she says something. She says, "The lights have gone dim again, haven't they?" And here is the moment the whole play turns on. Here is the small, quiet, devastating move. He looks at her, calm and gentle, perhaps even a little concerned for her, and he says, "No, the lights are exactly as bright as they always are. You must be imagining it. You've been imagining a great many things lately, my dear." And he keeps doing it, night after night. The lights dim, she sees it, she names it, and he tells her, softly, lovingly, that she is mistaken, that there is something wrong with her, that she cannot trust what her own eyes are plainly showing her. Sit with how patient that is. He never raises his voice. He never strikes her. He does not need to. He simply takes the one thing a person needs in order to stay sane, the quiet confidence that what they perceive is real, and he turns the flame down on it a little at a time until she begins to believe that the problem is not the house, and not the lamps, and not him. The problem is her. By the end, she is apologizing to him. She is grateful to him for being so patient with her terrible, failing memory, with her nerves, with her imagination. She has handed him the keys to her own reality. That is where the word comes from, to gaslight someone. It was sitting in a 1938 play this whole time, in the image of a man turning a flame low and swearing, "The room is just as bright as ever," until the woman beside him stops trusting her own eyes. And the reason that word has lasted, the reason it crept out of the theatre and into kitchens and offices and group chats all over the world, is that so many people heard it and felt a small, cold click of recognition. Oh, they thought, that, there is a name for that. Tonight, slowly and gently, with nothing asked of you and nothing for you to figure out, we are going to spend some time with that quiet, careful kind of harm. Not the loud kind, not the shouting, the slamming, the obvious cruelty that anyone could see across a crowded room. We are going to talk about the soft kind, the kind that wears a kind face, the kind that for the longest time you cannot quite name, because it never shows up in a single moment you could point to and say, there, that's the thing. And I want to be honest with you before we begin, because this is the heart of everything that follows. Most of what people say about manipulation gets the shape of it almost exactly wrong. We are told to watch for the monster. We are told to look for the villain, the obvious one, the one with the cruel smile and the cold eyes, the one any sensible person would spot from a mile off and steer clear of. We are told to trust our gut, to read their body language, to catch them in the lie. And so we go looking outward, scanning the other person, studying their face, replaying their words, trying to be the kind of clever, watchful person who would never, ever be fooled. Here is the trouble with all of that. Here is the quiet thing nobody mentions. You almost certainly cannot catch them that way. In 2006, two researchers named Charles Bond and Bella DePaulo did something patient and enormous. They gathered together the results of a huge number of studies, decades of experiments in which ordinary people watched or listened to others and tried to tell who was lying and who was telling the truth. They pooled it all and looked at the big picture, the kind of study we call a meta-analysis, which is really just a way of asking, across everything we know, what is actually true here. And what they found, when you average across all of it, is that human beings detect lies correctly about 54% of the time. Let that number settle for a moment in the dark, 54%. A coin flip lands you at 50. So all of our watching, all of our gut trusting, all of our certainty that we would know, that we could tell, that we'd see it in their eyes, all of it nudges us only the tiniest sliver above pure chance. We are essentially guessing. Confident, certain, and guessing. And think about what that means for the soft kind of manipulation, the careful kind, the kind practiced by someone who has had years of quiet practice. If we are barely better than a coin flip at spotting a stranger's clumsy lie in a laboratory, what hope do we have of reading, in the moment, the small, smooth untruths of someone we love and trust, someone who knows us, someone whose face we have learned to relax around? If you have been waiting to catch a manipulator in the act, to see it happen, to have the clean, satisfying proof, then I am sorry, but I have to tell you gently, you have been waiting for something that almost never comes. The act is built to be invisible. That is what makes it work. So here is where we turn the flame the other way. Here is the small, quiet reframe that the rest of this whole night rests on. And I want to say it as plainly as I can, because if you take only one thing into sleep tonight, let it be this. The most reliable sign that you are being manipulated is not anything they do. It is what keeps happening to you. It is not in their behavior, which you cannot reliably read. It is in yours, which you can. It is in the strange new shape your own inner life has taken since this person came into it. And the very first and clearest of those signs, the one that so many people recognize the instant they hear it, is this. You have started apologizing, constantly, reflexively. And here is the strange part, often for things you cannot even name. Sit with that. Not apologizing for a specific thing you did wrong, which is healthy and human and good, but apologizing as a kind of weather. Apologizing as a reflex, the way you'd flinch from a hot stove. Saying sorry before you've even worked out what for. Sorry, you say, when they go quiet. Sorry, you say, when their mood drops and the room goes cold. Sorry, you find yourself saying, for being tired, for being hungry, for having a feeling, for taking up a little space. You apologize, and if someone stopped you and asked gently, "What exactly are you sorry for?" you would not be able to tell them. The apology has come loose from any actual wrongdoing. It has become the toll you pay, again and again, just to keep the peace, just to turn the temperature back up in a room that keeps going cold. That is the gaslight dimming. That is you learning not to trust your own eyes. Because notice what the constant apologizing really is. It is your own mind quietly, over months or years, accepting a story. The story is that you are the problem, that when things go wrong between you, it is your fault, your sensitivity, your memory, you're too much, or you're not enough. And you did not arrive at that story by reason. You did not sit down one day and weigh the evidence and conclude fairly that you were the difficult one. The story was poured into you slowly, a little at a time, the way the gaslight dims, until one day you are standing in a room that has gone dark, apologizing to the person who turned the lamp down, grateful that they are so patient with you. So that is our first and best tool, and we will return to it again and again as the night goes on, because it is reliable in a way that reading their face never is. Not what do they do, but what has become of me. How do I feel after I spend time with this person? Smaller, foggier, more sorry, less sure of what I saw. But I do not want to leave you there yet with only the feeling, because feelings alone can be argued away. And a good manipulator is very, very good at arguing them away. I want to give you the why underneath it. I want to show you the machinery, gently, the way you might take the back off an old clock and look at the little wheels turning, because understanding how the thing works takes away so much of its power and so much of the shame. So let us talk softly about who these people actually are, because here is another place where the common story gets it wrong, and getting it wrong keeps people trapped for years. In the year 2002, two researchers, Delroy Paulhus and Kevin Williams, published a paper that gave us a phrase you may have heard, a phrase that has since traveled far beyond the quiet pages of the journal it appeared in. They called it the dark triad. A triad just means a group of three. And the three things they grouped together were three patterns of personality that scientists had mostly been studying separately, but that Paulhus and Williams noticed kept showing up together, kept overlapping, kept sharing something underneath. The three are these: narcissism, which most people half know already, the deep, hungry need to be admired, to be special, to be the center, paired with a thinness of feeling for anyone else. Machiavellianism, which is a longer word for a colder, more strategic thing, named after an old political writer, and which describes a person who sees other people mostly as tools, who plays a long game, who manipulates not in a hot rush of feeling, but in a patient, calculated, this serves my purpose sort of way. And psychopathy, which is the one that frightens people most because of films, but which simply means, at its core, a striking lack of empathy and remorse, an ease with using and discarding people, often wrapped in a surprising charm. Three distinct patterns, but Paulhus and Williams saw that they shared a common thread, a kind of family resemblance, and that thread is callousness, a coldness toward the inner life of other people, joined to a willingness to manipulate them. And in the years since, other researchers went looking for what that shared thread really was underneath all three. In 2018, a team of researchers, Morten Moshagen, Benjamin Hilbig, and Ingo Zettler, published work describing what they called the dark core of personality, sometimes shortened to the D factor. And the idea is beautifully, chillingly simple. Underneath narcissism and Machiavellianism and psychopathy, underneath all the dark traits, there is one common engine. It is the tendency to put your own gain above everyone else's, even at their direct expense, and then, crucially, to carry the beliefs that justify doing so. Not just to take, but to feel entitled to take. Not just to harm, but to have a ready story for why the harm was deserved or necessary, or really not so bad, or actually somehow the other person's fault. That little justifying engine matters enormously, and I want you to hold on to it as you drift, because it explains the apologizing. It explains the dimmed lamp. A person running on that dark core does not experience themselves as the villain. They experience themselves as the wronged one, the patient one, the one putting up with so much. And so when they turn your lamp down and swear the room is bright, they are not always coldly performing. Sometimes they half believe it. The justifying story runs underneath, and it is very convincing, and it is contagious, and after enough exposure you catch it too, and begin to believe that yes, the problem must be you. Now here is the part that I think will surprise you most, and I want to say it slowly because it is the thing that unlocks everything else. These three traits, the dark triad, are not a switch that is either on or off. They are not a box that a person is either inside or outside of. They live on a continuum, a dimension, a dial that runs from very low all the way up to very high, and every single person alive is somewhere on that dial. You are somewhere on it. I am somewhere on it. Most of us are low most of the time in most of the ways that matter, but the traits themselves are not rare, exotic things possessed only by monsters in a faraway place. They are ordinary human ingredients, present in everyone in small amounts and present in some people, perfectly functional, perfectly normal-seeming people, in larger ones. This is what researchers mean when they talk about the subclinical versions of these traits. Clinical means the rare, severe, diagnosable end, the kind that lands a person in a hospital or a courtroom. Subclinical means everything below that line. It means the person who has a real, measurable, elevated streak of narcissism or Machiavellianism or psychopathy, and who also holds down a job and pays a mortgage and has friends and shows up to the family dinner and is, by every outward measure, a normal, functioning member of the world. Researchers can even measure these everyday levels with proper instruments, questionnaires built and tested over years, with names like the short dark triad, abbreviated to the SD3, developed by Daniel Jones and Delroy Paulhus in 2014, and an earlier briefer one with the almost wry name of the Dirty Dozen, made by Peter Jonason and Gregory Webster back in 2010. 12 little questions that can pick up the everyday shadow in an everyday person. Do you understand what that means, lying there in the dark? It means the manipulator in your life, if there is one, is overwhelmingly unlikely to be a film villain. They are far more likely to be your charming coworker, the one everyone in the office adores, the one who somehow always ends up with credit for the good work and clean hands for the bad. They are far more likely to be the generous parent, the one who gave you so much, who reminds you so often of everything they gave. They are far more likely to be the partner who swept you off your feet so completely at the start that everyone said how lucky you were. Ordinary, functional, often well-liked, sometimes loved, not a stranger in an alley, someone at your table. And this is exactly why the old story, the monster story, is so dangerous, because it sends you looking for the wrong thing. It tells you to scan for fangs and cruelty and obvious villainy, and so when the harm comes wrapped in charm and concern, and I'm only telling you this because I love you, your alarm never sounds. You think, this can't be that because that is supposed to look frightening, and this looks like care. The monster story is a kind of camouflage that we hand to the very people we should be watching. So let us gently put 2 more myths to bed tonight, because they keep good people stuck and ashamed, and you deserve to sleep without them. The first myth is that you can spot a liar by their body, that they avoid your eyes, that they fidget and sweat and look away, and that a truthful person looks you steady in the face. It feels true, it feels obvious. It is, as far as the research can tell, mostly wrong. Many of the most practiced manipulators hold more eye contact, not less. They have learned that steady eyes read as honesty, so they give you steady eyes. The folk wisdom about shifty glances catches, at best, the nervous amateur, and the person doing real sustained harm in your life is rarely a nervous amateur. They are calm, they are warm, they look right at you while they turn the lamp down. And the second myth, the one I most want to lift off your shoulders before you sleep, is the cruelest of them all. It is the belief that if you were smart enough, you would never have fallen for it. That being deceived is a kind of stupidity. That clever people are safe.
It is not true. It was never true. Remember the number, 54%. That was not measured on foolish people. It was measured on everyone. The bright and the educated and the careful right alongside the rest. And all of them, all of us, hover just above the coin flip. Intelligence is not armor here.
In some quiet ways, it can even make things worse, because a clever mind is a clever mind, very good at building explanations, very good at constructing a reasonable story for why the lamp only seemed to dim, why this incident was a one-off, why the person who keeps hurting you is really under so much stress, really doesn't mean it really will change. The manipulation does not attack your intelligence. It goes underneath it to the older, deeper wiring we all share, the part of us that wants to be loved, that wants to keep the peace, that wants to repair the bond, that cannot bear to believe that someone we trusted would do this on purpose. That wiring is universal. It is in the genius and the simple soul alike. So whatever brought you here tonight, whatever quiet ache made the word manipulation catch your attention, please hear this. If it happened to you, it is not because you were foolish, it is because you were human. And the thing was built with great care to work on humans. Let us pause here just for a moment. There is no hurry. Take a slow, deep breath in through the nose and let it go, soft and long. Notice the weight of your body where it rests. Notice that for right now in this room, in this dark, nothing is being asked of you. There is no lamp to watch. No one here is going to tell you that you imagined it. When you are ready, with no effort at all, we will continue together, gently, into how all of this actually feels from the inside, and the quiet map of signs you can learn to read, not in them, but in yourself. So let us begin where the science begins, because there is a name for the kind of person we are talking about. And the name is not what most of us picture. When you hear the word manipulator, your mind may reach for something dramatic. A villain, a cold-eyed stranger in a film, someone you would recognize the moment they walked into a room. That picture is comforting in its way, because it suggests the danger is rare and far away and easy to spot. But the picture is wrong, and letting go of it is the first quiet step toward seeing clearly. In the year 2002, two researchers, Delroy Paulhus and Kevin Williams, gave us a phrase for a cluster of traits they kept finding tangled together in ordinary people. They called it the dark triad. 3 threads woven close. The first is narcissism, the deep hunger to be admired, to be seen as special. The second is Machiavellianism, named long ago for a writer who studied power, and it means a cool, strategic way of moving through the world, treating other people as pieces on a board rather than as hearts that can break. And the third is psychopathy, which here does not mean the monster of the movies, but a quieter thing, a thinness in the feeling of guilt, a smoothness where remorse should slow a person down. 3 traits, and here is the part that matters for you tonight, here in the dark, when no one is watching, and you can finally let the truth sit beside you without flinching. These traits are not a wall that divides the world into the broken few and the safe many. They are a slope, a continuum, the researchers would say, which simply means there is no clean line, no fence between them and us. We all sit somewhere on that slope, most of us low, some a little higher, and the people who quietly rearrange the rooms of our lives are very often not at the far, far end where the clinical monsters live. They are part way up, functioning, working, smiling. Subclinical, the science calls it, which is a careful word that means below the line a doctor would draw, walking among us, holding jobs, raising children, hosting dinners, being, by every outward measure, completely fine. Let that land softly, because it changes everything. It means the person who has been making you doubt yourself may not look like anything is wrong with them at all. They may be the charming one, the generous one, the one everyone else adores, the one your friends cannot believe you would say a single hard word about. Charm before control, the survivors say, again and again. The warmth at the start is not proof of a good heart. Sometimes it is simply the first move. There was, years later, a further discovery, and it is the kind of thing that makes the whole picture click quietly into place, the way a key you have been fumbling with finally turns. In 2018, 3 researchers, Moshagan, Hilbig, and Zettler, looked underneath the 3 traits the way you might look beneath 3 different plants to find they share a single tangle of roots. And they proposed that beneath narcissism, beneath Machiavellianism, beneath that thinness of remorse, there runs one common thread. They called it the dark core, the D factor. And stripped of its scientific clothing, it means something very simple, almost childlike in its plainness. It is the tendency to put your own gain above everyone else's and to carry, ready in your pocket, the beliefs that make that feel justified, to take and to have an explanation for the taking. That is the whole engine, not 3 separate enemies you must learn to tell apart. One disposition wearing 3 coats. And once you understand that, you stop needing to become a detective of personality types. You stop trying to diagnose the person across the table, because the disposition itself is not the thing you can see. It hides. It is good at hiding. That is rather the point of it, which brings us, gently, to the great myth, the one most of us were handed without ever choosing it, and the one we can set down now, here, tonight. The myth says that manipulators are rare, that they are obvious, that they are monsters you would know on sight, and that if you are kind and watchful, and above all clever, you will simply see them coming. It is a lovely story. It lets us feel safe, and it is not true. We touched on this already, but let us say it once more plainly, because it is the hinge the whole night turns on. Humans asked to spot a lie are right about 54% of the time. Bond and DePaulo gathered the studies together in 2006, a great pile of them, and that is the number that fell out, 54, barely a hand's width above the coin flip. We are, all of us, nearly blind to deception in the moment it is happening, no matter how sharp our minds, no matter how carefully we watch the eyes, the hands, the small movements we were always told would give a liar away. Those tells are folklore. Many of the most practiced manipulators hold your gaze longer, not shorter. They do not fidget. They are calm because for them there is nothing to be nervous about. So if you have been waiting quietly to catch them in the act, to see the mask slip just once so you would finally know for certain, please understand that you have been standing guard at the wrong door. The act is the one thing you cannot reliably read. This is not a failure in you, it is a fact about all human beings written into us, the same in the wise and the foolish alike. And this is where the whole shape of things turns over, and the relief begins to seep in, the way warmth seeps into cold hands held near a fire. Because if you cannot read them, then watching them harder, studying them, lying awake, replaying their words to find the proof, all of that is effort spent at a locked door. The reliable signal was never in them. It was never going to be in them. The reliable signal is in you. That is the heart of everything we will explore together. Not what they do, which you are near blind to, but what consistently happens to you. The slow distortions in your own inner weather, the apologizing for things you cannot even name, the fog that settles after certain conversations, the sense of being a little less sure of your own memory than you were the day before, the strange relief, far bigger than the moment deserves when they are finally in a good mood again, the way your world has quietly grown smaller, fewer friends, fewer calls home, and you cannot point to the day you decided any of that. These are not signs you must read in their face. They are signs already written in your own life, in your own body, in the place you live every hour of every day. You are the one instrument you can always read, and there is no shame in any of it. This is perhaps the gentlest thing the science gives us, and I want to set it down beside you like a warm cup. If the tactics work on the clever and the slow alike, on the watchful and the trusting alike, then your having been reached by them says nothing about your worth and nothing about your wits. It says only that you have the ordinary, beautiful, defenseless equipment of a person who can love, the wanting to be loved, the wanting to keep the peace, the instinct to repair what is broken between you and someone you trusted. That equipment is not a flaw. On most days, in most lives, it is the very best of us. It is only that, now and then, it meets a hand that knows how to use it. So we will not be learning tonight to harden ourselves, or to grow cold, or to suspect everyone who is kind to us. That would be its own kind of loss, and you have lost enough. We will be learning something quieter and far more useful, to listen to ourselves, to trust the small, steady evidence of our own inner state over the loud, confident account someone else insists upon, to notice the pattern, because the pattern is where the truth always lived, never in the single incident, which can always be explained away. Let us pause here again before we go on. Breathe in, slow and easy, and let it out longer than you took it in. You do not need to hold any of these names in your memory. Not the dark triad, not the dark core, not the number 54. They are only lamps we are lighting along the path, and you may let each one fall behind you as we pass it. There is nothing to study here, nothing to get right. When you are ready, with no effort at all, we will move a little closer into the first of the quiet signs, the ones that live not in anyone else, but in the soft, true country of how you have been feeling all along. And so let us begin there, not with them, with you. There is a particular kind of apologizing that belongs to this conversation. It is different from the apology you offer when you are late, or when you have said something unkind, or when you have broken something that mattered to someone. That kind of apology comes with a clear face. You know what you did. You feel the shape of it. The words arrive naturally because they are attached to something real. This other kind of apologizing is shapeless. You find yourself saying sorry and then, almost immediately, searching for what you are sorry for. You replay the conversation, trying to locate the moment you went wrong. Sometimes you find it and it seems small, smaller than the weight of the apology you offered. Sometimes you do not find it at all. You were sorry before you understood why. The words came first and the reason trailed behind or never arrived. Notice if that sounds familiar. Not a small passing recognition, but a recognition that settles, that sits down. Because that particular apology, the one without an address, the sorry that precedes the reason, is one of the earliest and most reliable signals that something in a relationship has been quietly shifting. It means, at some level beneath conscious thought, you have learned that the safest position is already retreated. That being wrong, or at least appearing to be wrong, is safer than the alternative. You have been trained into it, slowly enough that you did not notice the training. And the training did not come from a single conversation or a single difficult evening. It came from a pattern. Many evenings, many conversations, each one teaching you, molecule by molecule, that contracting was better than holding your ground. Breathe with that for a moment. Let it be soft and slow. Now here is the one that tends to strike people hardest when they first encounter it, because it is so intimate, so specific to the texture of a particular relationship. You rehearse. Before you talk to this person, you think through the conversation in advance. You run it. You anticipate their objections. You pre-answer their counter-arguments. You think about how they might respond, and how you will respond to that, and how they will then respond to that. And by the time the real conversation begins, you are already tired from the one you had alone in advance, in the quiet of your own mind. People sometimes describe this as anxiety, or as over-preparation, or as simply being thorough. And in other contexts with other people, it would be exactly that. But notice whether this rehearsal happens with everyone or whether it happens with one specific person. Notice whether you go into conversations with your closest friend having prepared your defense in advance. Whether you replay dinner with your parents in the same way, constructing answers before the questions arrive. Whether you do this with your manager at work or only with this particular colleague. The specificity is the signal. You are not a rehearsing person by nature. You have become a rehearsing person in this relationship because the conversations have taught you that you are always one wrong word away from something. A shift in their expression, a sudden, cool silence, a small, precise criticism that lands where it hurts. Your mind learned to run the simulation ahead of time because experience taught it that arriving unprepared is not safe. That is not anxiety, or rather, the anxiety is the symptom. The cause is that you have been taught consistently and over time that this person's responses are not reliable in the way most people's responses are reliable, that you cannot say the thing and wait to see how it lands the way you can with almost anyone else in your life. The ground is not steady here, so you study the ground before you step. And the ground, of course, was made unsteady by someone. Let us breathe a moment before we go deeper. Take a slow breath in, let it fill you, and let it go slowly out. Good. There is no rush here tonight. Nowhere to arrive. Let us talk about the foggy feeling, because this one has a particular texture, and people often take years to locate the name for it. And once they find the name, it changes something. It does not fix anything, not yet, but it changes something, because things that are named can be seen, and things that can be seen can, in time, be walked away from. The foggy feeling goes like this. You have a conversation. Something in it bothers you. There was a moment, you felt it, when something was said or done or not said or not done that stung or frightened or confused or diminished you in some way. You know this. The feeling is clear enough. But by the end of the conversation, you are not sure. The other person gave their account of events. They said it didn't happen that way. They said you are misremembering. They said you are being sensitive or dramatic, or you always do this, you always make things into something bigger than they are. And now, somewhere between their certainty and your original feeling, you have lost your footing. Maybe they are right. They said it with such confidence. They seemed genuinely baffled that you had taken it the way you did. You replay the moment and now it looks different, seen through the lens of their version. Maybe you are remembering it wrong. Maybe your feelings are too large. Maybe, and this is the most corrosive maybe there is simply something off in the way you perceive things. That particular maybe is what the husband in the play was engineering. Night after night, lamp by lamp, certainty by certainty, dimming the light and swearing it was bright. His goal was not a single lie. His goal was to install a doubt so deep that she could no longer trust the instrument she would otherwise use to detect the lies, her own perception. The sociologist Paige Sweet, writing in the American Sociological Review in 2019, looked carefully at how this works and found something important that most discussions of gaslighting miss. She found that gaslighting does not succeed on its own. It succeeds when it has a platform to stand on, when there is already a power difference or a credibility asymmetry between the person doing it and the person experiencing it. When the manipulator can draw on something, their social role, their authority, the relationship script, cultural assumptions about who is reasonable and who is emotional, that makes their account seem more trustworthy than the target's account in advance. So when someone says to you you're being too sensitive, they are not just making an observation. They are making a claim about whose perception is reliable, and they are making it inside a system that often pre-answers that question before either of you has spoken. If they are the partner, and you are the one described, historically, as the anxious one, their claim has a ready audience. If they are the parent and you are the child who was always told you were dramatic, their claim has decades of precedent behind it. If they are the confident extrovert and you are the quieter person in the room itself may have already decided whose account sounds more credible. The gaslighting does not have to be creative, it just has to exploit the asymmetry that already exists. And the asymmetry does a great deal of the work before the other person opens their mouth, which is one of the reasons it is so difficult to name in the moment. You are not only fighting their version of events, you are fighting the broader, older system that says their version of events is more trustworthy than yours. That system has been there your whole life in one form or another. The gaslighter did not build it, they merely learned how to use it. Let yourself breathe. These are heavy things. Let the breath be a small, reliable kindness to yourself right now. And here is something worth sitting with for a moment, because it tends to bring some people tremendous relief when they hear it, and other people simply a sadness that was already there but had no name. You did not fail to notice. That is worth saying slowly and clearly, because the shame of not seeing it sooner sits on many people who are trying to understand what happened to them. You did notice. You noticed every time. The feeling was always there. The sting, the confusion, the small cold drop in your stomach when a conversation went a particular direction. You felt it. The question is not whether you noticed. The question is what happened to your noticing afterward. And the answer is that it was taken from you piece by piece through repeated insistence that what you noticed was not real. That is a different story than not being perceptive enough. That is a story about a relentless, patient campaign to teach a person not to trust themselves. And it works on perceptive people. It works especially well on perceptive people, because a perceptive person takes the other person's version of events seriously. A perceptive person considers whether they might be wrong. A perceptive person has the intellectual humility and emotional generosity to think, maybe they are right, maybe I am too close to this, maybe my feelings are distorting my reading. Those are good qualities. They are marks of a thoughtful, fair-minded person. The manipulator's technique works by targeting exactly those qualities and turning them against the person who carries them. Now let us talk about something small and heartbreaking and very specific. Keeping records. There is a point, often described by people only in retrospect, often described quietly, with a kind of embarrassment, where the person being manipulated starts keeping evidence. Not in a dramatic way, not with any plan, just quietly, screenshots. A note in a private notebook, a photograph of a text message, an email saved to a folder no one else knows about. They are doing this because they have stopped trusting their own memory. They have been told often enough that they are remembering things wrong, that things were not said the way they remember them being said, that they never actually agreed to that, or that they did agree and now they are trying to revise the agreement. They have been told this often enough that they have started to document reality in order to have something to return to, an anchor, a piece of external, unalterable evidence that says, this happened, this was said, I was here, I was right. If you have done this or are doing this now, I want you to hear what it means. It does not mean you are paranoid. It does not mean you are collecting ammunition to use in a fight. It means your mind, which is healthy and trying to protect you, has found a way to compensate for the systematic erosion of your ability to trust your own account of events. You built yourself a small external record because the internal one was under attack. That is a rational response to an irrational situation. That is your instinct for truth working. even when the ground you are standing on has been made uncertain. Hold that gently for a moment. Your instinct for truth was still working. Let us go slower now into one that is quieter and harder to see in the moment, because it does not feel like something that is being done to you. It feels like something that simply happened. Your world got smaller. Not dramatically, not all at once, but at some point you look up and you realize that you see less of the people you used to see. A friendship that used to be easy became complicated, and you let it fade because maintaining it took energy that was being used elsewhere. A family member you used to speak to regularly, the contact became less frequent, then sparse, then almost nothing, and you could not say exactly when. A hobby or a community you used to participate in gradually slipped away. And there was always a reason in the moment, a scheduling conflict, a difficult week, their discomfort with you spending time away, and you accommodated it, and then you accommodated it again, and then the thing itself simply ceased to be part of your life, so gently and so gradually that there was no moment to push back against. This is what coercive control looks like from the inside, not the dramatic lock on the door, but the slow, quiet narrowing of the life around a person until the world is mostly just them. Evan Stark, whose research gave us the framework for understanding coercive control, described it not as a collection of incidents, but as a pattern of isolation, of monitoring, of gradually regulating what a person does and who a person sees and how a person moves through the day. And in England and Wales, following the Serious Crime Act of 2015, coercive control became a criminal offence, precisely because the law recognised what researchers had understood for years. The pattern is the harm, not any single event within it. The pattern is what robs a person of their liberty, even when no single incident would, in isolation, constitute a crime. You may not be in a situation that meets that legal threshold. Most people navigating these dynamics are not. But the mechanism is the same, dialed to different intensities along a continuum. A world that has quietly shrunk without you making a conscious decision to shrink it is a world that has been worked on, and the fact that you cannot point to a single moment when it happened is not evidence that it did not happen. It is, in a way, evidence that it did. That is how the mechanism works. It is the sum of small, individually deniable moments, each one explicable, the pattern invisible unless you step back far enough to see the whole shape of what has changed. Let yourself breathe, long and slow. Let the breath be a little generous. Now the untraceable obligation. This one is uncomfortable because it can feel ungrateful to name it. The person has been good to you in their way. They have done things, given things, shown up at the right times, said the right things in the right moments, and you feel deeply, persistently, that you owe them something, a kind of debt that does not reduce no matter how much you pay toward it. A debt that seems to expand the more you try to address it, so that the more you give, the more there is to give, and the more you sacrifice, the more the sacrifice feels insufficient. The social scientist Robert Cialdini spent years studying compliance, the mechanisms by which people come to agree to things, to do things, to give things, in contexts where they might not have freely chosen to. And one of the most powerful and universal mechanisms he found was reciprocity, the felt obligation to return what we have been given. This principle runs deep in us. It is not a flaw, it is part of what makes human cooperation possible. When someone gives to us, we feel a pull to give back. When someone does us a favor, we feel indebted. This is ancient and prosocial, and in most human interactions, a beautiful feature of our social wiring. But this mechanism does not verify the intent behind the gift before it creates the feeling of obligation. It simply responds to the giving. And so, unsolicited generosity, gifts you did not ask for, favors performed before you had the chance to say whether you wanted them, attentions and presences and sacrifices, offered in a way that makes you feel immediately that you owe something, can be used to create a feeling of debt that you did not choose and perhaps did not want, but which is now real and present and affecting your decisions. Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser showed this with great clarity back in 1966 in a study that has been replicated many times since. They found that people who complied with a small initial request became dramatically more likely to comply with a larger request later. Getting someone to say yes to something small primes them to say yes to something bigger because the self-image formed by the first yes, I am the kind of person who cooperates with this, makes the second yes easier to arrive at. The foot in the door. A small ask, a small yes, and the door is no longer shut. A manipulator does not plan this consciously in every instance. The D factor, that common core of the dark triad that Moshagan, Hilbig, and Zettler described in their 2018 research, the disposition to maximize one's own position at others' expense with accompanying beliefs that justify it. This does not always manifest as a deliberate strategy. Sometimes it is a pattern of behavior that gets results, and the person using it learns over time that certain approaches open certain doors. Small gifts, well-timed, favors that arrive when you are vulnerable, generosity performed where others can see it so that it becomes part of the public account of who this person is, an account you feel unable to contradict because it would make you seem ungrateful or difficult or small. The obligation you feel may be completely real. What may be manufactured is the situation that created it. Let us pause here. Breathe in and let it out. Let the body soften just a little. We are moving through something tonight, and there is no need to hurry it. There is one more signal in the internal state audit, and it is perhaps the strangest to sit with because it feels like relief, and relief is supposed to be a good thing. They are in a good mood tonight, or they came home without that particular heaviness, or the message was warm or at least neutral instead of the coolness that has become unpredictable, and you feel, somewhere in your chest, a release of something you had not quite been aware you were holding. A small lightening. Almost joy, though the word joy seems too large. More like the absence of the thing you had been bracing for. Notice the proportion of the feeling. Notice whether it matches the situation. A person whose partner is simply having a pleasant evening should feel, if anything, a quiet, ordinary contentment. Not relief as though something has been narrowly avoided, not that particular loosening as though a held breath has finally been allowed out. The relief that feels disproportionate to the situation is a signal. It is telling you that you have been in a state of low-level vigilance, waiting for the other shoe. It tells you that the pleasant version of this person, the warm one, the generous one, the one who makes you feel seen and valuable, has become unpredictable enough that its arrival is experienced not as normal life, but as reprieve. And that unpredictability is not accidental. Burrus Frederick Skinner, working in mid-century America, demonstrated something about behavior that seemed counterintuitive and has since become foundational to behavioral science. He showed that animals, and the principle extends to humans, respond most persistently and most powerfully to rewards that arrive unpredictably. Not every time, but on a variable schedule. Sometimes this action produces the reward, sometimes it does not, and the ratio shifts in ways that cannot be anticipated. This is called a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, and what Skinner found was that this schedule, more than any other, produces behavior that is extremely resistant to extinction, meaning even when the reward stops coming altogether, the behavior continues far longer than it would if the reward had been predictable and regular. This is the mechanism that makes slot machines work, not the winning, the unpredictability of the winning. If every third pull of the lever produced a small reward, you would play until you had collected your predetermined number of small rewards and then stop. But because you cannot predict when the next reward will arrive, you keep pulling. The variability is the hook. The unpredictability is what keeps you at the machine. The partner who is sometimes warm and sometimes cold, not because of their mood, not because of circumstances, but in a pattern that seems to follow no rule you can identify, is running, whether they know it or not, on a variable ratio schedule. The warmth becomes the reward, the withdrawal is the unpredictability, and the effect on you is the same effect the slot machine has on its player, an attention that is almost impossible to walk away from because some part of your nervous system is always waiting for the next signal, the next expression of warmth, the next moment of feeling that you matter to them, and that feeling could come at any time, which means you cannot afford to stop watching. This is one of the reasons, perhaps the primary reason, that relationships with people high in dark triad traits are described by those who have been in them as so profoundly, unexpectedly hard to leave. Not because the person is always wonderful, often they are not, but because the reward, when it comes, is real. You are not imagining it, you are not being foolish. The warmth is genuinely felt, and it comes on a schedule that keeps you waiting for it with an intensity that would not exist if it came reliably and often. Patrick Carnes used the term trauma bonding to describe the attachment that forms inside these cycles, the bond that is paradoxically strengthened by the cycle of harm and repair, cold and warm, withheld and given. The cycle does not weaken the attachment, it deepens it. Each reunion, each thaw, each moment of warmth after a period of cold lands harder than it would in a relationship where warmth was simply the ordinary weather. You are not weak for finding it hard to leave. You are running on a schedule that was designed by behavioral science to be exactly that difficult. Breathe. Take a moment with that. Now let us talk about the thing that holds all of this individual data together, and that tells you why each individual piece of it seemed so easy to explain away at the time. It is called the fundamental attribution error, and it is a quirk in the way human beings assign cause to behavior. When something goes wrong in your own behavior, when you snap at someone or fail to follow through or get something wrong, your instinct is to look for external reasons. You were tired, you were having a hard week, you were provoked. You explain your own behavior by reference to circumstances. But when something goes wrong in someone else's behavior, the instinct moves in the opposite direction. You assign the cause to their character, to who they are, rather than to what was happening around them. This is the usual description of the error, and it applies broadly to how we think about people in general. But in the context of a close relationship with someone who manipulates, the error works in a somewhat different and more painful way. Each incident, the cruel comment, the cold withdrawal, the twisting of what was said, the blame placed where it did not belong, each individual incident arrives inside a context. They were stressed. There had been a hard conversation the week before, and things were still tender. You had said something that morning that you perhaps should not have said. The incident was bad, but there was a context, and the context made it possible to absorb it without naming it for what it was. You gave it a circumstantial explanation. You said, "That is not who they are, that is just this particular day," and then the next incident arrived, and it also had a context, and the one after that, each one absorbed into its own particular circumstances, each one excused by reference to something surrounding it. What the error prevents you from doing is adding them up. Each incident, evaluated on its own terms inside its own context, seems survivable, even understandable. The pattern that the incidents form, the pattern you would see if you laid them all out and stood back far enough to see the whole, is entirely different. But the fundamental attribution error does not evaluate patterns, it evaluates incidents. It looks at each tree individually, and so you live for a long time inside a forest without ever seeing the forest itself. This is precisely why the most important word in this whole conversation is not any tactics name, not gaslighting or Darvo or love bombing. The most important word is pattern. The pattern is where the truth has always lived. And you are being prevented from seeing the pattern not by stupidity and not by a failure of love, but by an ordinary cognitive bias that applies to every human mind. And that was being exploited by someone who, consciously or not, understood its mechanics well enough to rely on them. Let us breathe together here gently. Let the out-breath be a little longer than the in-breath. That is good. Now, one more thing before we move on, and this one matters because it dismantles one of the most common images people carry when they think about manipulation. The image that keeps them from recognizing it when it is close. When most people imagine a manipulative person, they imagine a certain kind of presence. Loud, demanding, obviously self-centered, imperious. The kind of person who walks into a room and takes it over, who speaks about themselves without ceasing, who reacts with explosive anger when they do not get what they want, who needs constant admiration in a way that is visible and wearing. That person exists. That is one face of narcissistic personality, the grandiose face. And the people who share their lives with someone who fits that description often know at some level, even if they are not quite ready to say it aloud, that there is a problem. The grandiosity is visible, the need is undisguised, the dynamic has a shape they can eventually name. But there is another kind, and this is the kind that operates more quietly, and that the people around it often do not see until much later, or in some cases never see at all, because it does not fit the image. Research on narcissism has identified two distinct subtypes that feel from the outside like almost opposite personalities. Grandiose narcissism is the version most people picture, but vulnerable narcissism, also called covert narcissism, looks quite different. The vulnerable narcissist is not loud and imperious. They are often quiet, sensitive seeming, easily wounded. They carry the air of someone who has been deeply misunderstood, someone whose gifts have not been recognized, someone who suffers more than others and deserves more care. They do not demand admiration openly. They cultivate it through a different route, through the performance of suffering, through the gentle accumulation of others' guilt, through the constant low-level suggestion that they are the one who has been wronged, who has given more than they received, who has endured more than any fair accounting would justify. The manipulation that moves through this personality type is not delivered in commands. It is delivered in sighs, in silences that ask to be broken, in the story told often of how much they have sacrificed, how little they have been appreciated, how hard things have always been for them. It operates through the listener's empathy, not through fear. You find yourself doing things not because you have been told to do them, but because you cannot bear to be the source of more pain for this already suffering person. You find yourself taking responsibility for their emotional weather. You find yourself shrinking your own needs, apologizing for your own demands on their attention, managing your own distress privately so as not to add to their already too heavy burden. And if you try to name what is happening, if you say quietly that you are tired, or that you need something different, or that you are not sure this arrangement is working for you, the response is not anger. It is hurt. Profound, sorrowful, eloquent hurt. The kind of hurt that makes you feel immediately that you have done something terrible by daring to have a need. The kind that turns the conversation in less time than you could have predicted from your concern to their pain at your having raised a concern. This is manipulation. Not because suffering is not real. It may be entirely real, but because the suffering is being deployed, consciously or not, to regulate your behavior and prevent you from making claims on your own behalf. The martyr and the tyrant are not always different people. Sometimes they are the same person, wearing different registers in different moments, and the martyr role is simply the more effective one. And because the covert version does not look like the common image of a manipulator, because it looks often like the opposite, like vulnerability, like fragility, like someone who needs protecting rather than someone who is doing harm, it is among the most effective and least visible forms of the pattern we are talking about tonight. You may have spent years feeling guilty for feeling what you feel around this person. The guilt itself was the mechanism. It was keeping you still. Breathe. Let that land gently. Let it soften rather than harden. There is something to be held carefully in everything we have covered so far tonight, and I want to name it explicitly before we move on. What we have been doing, walking through the internal state audit, laying out the signals that live not in the other person's behavior, but in the accumulated texture of your own inner life, is not an attempt to make you paranoid or to cast suspicion on everyone who is sometimes difficult. People are difficult. Relationships are complicated. People have hard days and hard years and hard histories that shape how they move through the world and through you. Not every painful relationship is a manipulation. Not every moment of being hurt is part of a pattern. The question is always the pattern, a single apology that lacks a clear address, a single rehearsed conversation, a single moment of feeling foggy after a disagreement. None of these, on their own, tells you anything definitive. But if, reading through this quietly, in the space of this night you have been finding recognition after recognition, if these signals are not occasional but consistent, not surprising but familiar, not isolated but woven through the whole texture of a particular relationship, then that recognition is itself a kind of signal, a quiet one worth sitting with, one worth not explaining away. Because here is the thing that the research keeps coming back to, the thing that Page Sweet's sociological analysis and the Bond and DePaulo lie detection findings and the whole architecture of what we understand about these dynamics points toward. You are not designed to catch a manipulator in the act. Not reliably. Not in any given moment. The moment is too easy to cloud, too easy to fill with alternative explanations, too easy to make you question whether what you saw was what you saw. But you are designed to feel the cumulative weight of what is happening to you. The body keeps a kind of account, the way you have been sleeping, the particular weight of Sundays before the week begins, or Friday evenings before the weekend does, the way you feel driving home versus driving away, the small, barely spoken relief when they are out of the house. These are not dramatic revelations. They are very quiet, very small, very honest reports from a nervous system that has been tracking something you have not yet been able to name. Trust the small reports. They have been accurate all along. Let us rest here for a moment. Just breathe long and easy. Let the thoughts settle if they want to settle, or let them move if they need to move. You do not need to decide anything tonight. You do not need to do anything with what you are hearing. Tonight is only for understanding, for the soft, patient work of beginning to see. And when you are ready, without any hurry at all, we will move on together to the next part of this, to the tactics themselves, the specific moves, each one named and made legible, so that if you encounter them again, you will have words for them. And words make things smaller. And smaller things are things you can eventually hold without being held by them. There is a moment, in the middle of an argument you did not start, when you realize you are no longer defending what actually happened. You are defending your right to have seen what you saw. You are defending your memory. You are defending your own perception of a conversation that occurred last Tuesday, or last month, or sometime in what now feels like a fog, and somewhere in that defending, you lose track of what you were originally trying to say. The argument has moved. The ground has shifted beneath you so smoothly you did not feel it move. That shift has a name, several names actually, and naming them is part of how they lose some of their power over you. Let us begin with the one that might be the most disorienting to encounter because it happens at exactly the moment when you are trying to address something real. When you have gathered the quiet courage to say, "I noticed this thing," or "this hurt me," or "I want to talk about what happened," this is the moment the named move appears. Jennifer Freyd, a psychologist who spent years studying how people respond when their behavior is called out, coined a term in 1997 for something she had observed repeatedly. She called it DARVO. The letters stand for deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. And while it sounds clinical when you lay it out like that, you may recognize it the moment you hear it described because it follows a pattern so specific it is almost choreographed. Deny comes first. The thing did not happen. You are misremembering. You are misinterpreting. The conversation you are describing bears no relationship to the conversation they experienced. You have constructed this version of events, this grievance, this complaint, out of something that simply was not there. They may say this gently, with a kind of patient weariness, as if they have had to correct your perception many times before, and they are tired of it, but they will do it again because that is the kind of person they are. Or they may say it sharply, with a flash of something hard in their voice. Either way, the first move is to make the event itself disappear. Attack comes second, and it does not always look like aggression. Sometimes attack looks like concern. You are worrying them, bringing up things like this. They are starting to wonder about your mental health. Other people have noticed something too. They are not the only one. The attack can be aimed at your credibility, your stability, your memory, your motivations. Why are you really bringing this up? What do you actually want? Is this about what you said, or is this about something else entirely? The attack moves the conversation away from the original complaint and toward you, your character, your reliability, as a witness to your own life. And then comes the reversal. This is the part that leaves people most confused, because somewhere in the architecture of the argument, the person who started out calling something hurtful has become, by the end, the one who is doing the hurting. They are devastated that you would think this of them. They are wounded that after everything, you would accuse them of something like this. They are the one who is suffering. They are the one who needs support. And you find yourself improbably apologizing. Not for a specific thing you did, for having raised the subject at all, for having made them feel this way, for having been somehow the problem. It is worth sitting with how total this reversal is and how quickly it can happen. You came into the conversation with a legitimate concern. You leave it with a vague, guilty feeling and no resolution of the original issue. The issue itself has not been addressed, not even acknowledged as real. It has been dissolved by the weight of their distress, which arrived so suddenly and with such force that your distress got swallowed by it. This is not a coincidence. The structure of DARVO is precisely designed to make that happen. Freyd's research and the work that came after it by researchers like Sarah Harsey found that DARVO is most often deployed in response to disclosures of abuse, harm, or boundary violations. It is the move that follows being caught. And it works, in part, because it exploits the same decency that led you to raise the issue in the first place. You brought it up because you care about the relationship, because you wanted to address something rather than let it fester. The reversal weaponizes that care. It turns your desire to resolve things into the instrument of your own silencing. There is something related to DARVO that sometimes precedes it and sometimes follows it and sometimes runs alongside it. It is called reactive abuse. And it is worth understanding separately because it involves a step that manipulators sometimes take deliberately. They provoke you until you react, and then they use your reaction as evidence. The provocation can be almost anything: a cutting remark that lands and then disappears, a subtle undermining in front of others, an insult delivered so softly it could plausibly be a joke, a silence that stretches just slightly too long, charged with something you cannot name, a consistent pattern of small cruelties, each one individually dismissible, collectively unbearable. And eventually, if the pattern runs long enough and you are human enough to have a threshold, you break. You raise your voice, you say something sharp, you cry or you shout, or you leave the room in a way that cannot be interpreted as calm. And in that moment, you have given them what they needed. Your reaction, the raised voice, the tears, the door slam becomes the story. You are volatile. You are the one with the anger problem. You are the reason these conversations always end badly. The original provocation, which was the entire engine of the moment, which was the thing that made your reaction inevitable, simply does not appear in the account of what happened. This is why reactive abuse is so particularly hard to see from inside it, because the thing you are reacting to is real and your reaction to it is understandable, but the version of events that gets told afterward features only the reaction, stripped of its cause. And if you have been hearing for long enough that you are the volatile one, the sensitive one, the difficult one, you may have started to believe it. You may have started to wonder whether you actually are those things, which is again not a coincidence. Now let us move to a different mechanism, one that feels when it is happening almost entirely like a personal virtue rather than a trap. Guilt is a pro-social emotion. This is important to understand. Guilt evolved because it is useful. It motivates repair. When you genuinely hurt someone, guilt is the feeling that pushes you to go back, to acknowledge what happened, to make it right. It is one of the mechanisms that holds relationships and communities together. The capacity to feel guilty is not a weakness. In healthy relationships, guilt works as a signal. Something needs attention, something needs fixing, go do the work. But a signal that is genuinely useful is also one that can be manufactured. And manufactured guilt is one of the most quietly effective compliance tools available to a person who is willing to use it. The foot-in-the-door principle, documented in a careful experiment by Jonathan Friedman and Scott Fraser in 1966, demonstrated something specific and somewhat unsettling about how compliance works. They found that if you get someone to agree to a small request, they become significantly more likely to agree to a much larger request later. Part of what drives this is consistency. Once you have said yes to something, you have built an identity as the kind of person who says yes to these kinds of things. Saying no to the next request feels inconsistent with who you are. The first yes changes how you see yourself, and how you see yourself shapes what you do next. Manipulators use this, often not consciously, sometimes very consciously, to build what feels like obligation but was never actually agreed to. It might begin with small favors, done enthusiastically and unrequested. They carry something for you. They remember your lunch order. They do the thing you mentioned you needed to do. The pattern of giving, of showing up, of being indispensable creates a weight of received generosity that begins to feel like debt. And when the request comes or the expectation is violated, the guilt that follows is entirely real, even though the original debt was constructed. Robert Cialdini, whose work on influence and persuasion remains foundational, called this the reciprocity principle. The felt obligation to return what has been given is one of the most durable social norms humans have. It operates even when the original gift was unsolicited, even when you did not want it, even when you sensed somewhere that there was a string attached. The gift still creates the pull, and if someone understands this, they can give deliberately in order to obligate strategically. The guilt trip that follows a violated expectation is not random, it is calibrated. It often takes the form of an accounting, sometimes spoken, sometimes implied. After everything I have done for you, after everything I have sacrificed, I did not sleep, I did not eat, I gave up this thing and that thing and the other thing. The accounting is not really about gratitude, it is about establishing a debt the other person did not know they were incurring. And when the accounting arrives, the feeling it produces in a reasonable, empathic person is immediate and uncomfortable. I owe something. I am behind. I have failed someone who has given me so much. This is why guilt tripping is particularly effective on people who already care. A person with low empathy does not feel the pull very strongly, but a person who genuinely loves the other or genuinely wants the relationship to be good feels it with full force. Their empathy, the very thing that makes them a good partner, a good child, a good friend, becomes the surface through which the guilt enters. The martyr posture belongs here too, the person who is perpetually suffering, who sighs heavily and says it is fine, even though it is clearly not fine, who makes themselves smaller, eats less, sleeps less, gives more, and lets you know quietly and consistently that they are diminished by the weight of what they carry for others. The martyr does not make direct requests. Direct requests could be refused. Instead, the martyr creates a climate in which your own comfort becomes intolerable. You cannot enjoy yourself while they are suffering. You cannot say no when saying no means adding to a burden that already looks impossible. The obligation is manufactured not by asking, but by suffering, visibly and close to you, in a way that assigns the cause to your choices. Covert narcissism, the quiet, inward-turning kind rather than the loud, grandiose kind, often operates through exactly this mechanism. The covert narcissist rarely takes the stage. They are frequently self-deprecating, frequently a martyr, frequently the one in the corner who gave everything and received so little. Their grandiosity is not about dominance, but about uniqueness of suffering. No one has endured what they have endured. No one understands the depth of their pain. And the people around them, particularly the ones who love them, spend enormous amounts of energy trying to alleviate a suffering that, it turns out, is never quite alleviated. Because the suffering is not a description of their condition, it is a management strategy. Let us rest here for just a breath, long and easy, in and out. Notice the particular kind of heaviness that comes with understanding this, the recognition of something you may have been living inside. That heaviness is allowed. Let it be here without trying to fix it or move away from it. We are just understanding tonight. That is all. Now we move to perhaps the most confusing part of all, the part that comes at the beginning before any of the rest of it. Because before the control comes the warmth, before the distance comes the closeness. Before you found yourself apologizing for things you cannot name, there was a period, maybe a short period, maybe several months, when being with this person felt like being chosen, like being finally fully seen. Love bombing is the term for what that early period often is. The word sounds dramatic, militarized, and that is part of what makes it hard to apply to your own experience. Nothing about it felt like a bomb. It felt like luck. It felt like abundance. The origin of the term actually comes from a very specific context. In the 1970s, researchers studying the Unification Church, the religious movement led by Sun Myung Moon, whose followers became known as the Moonies, observed a recruitment technique in which new members were showered with intense warmth, physical affection, attention, and expressions of love and belonging before any doctrinal commitment was asked of them. The emotional saturation came first. The bond was formed before the belief was required. And once the bond was formed, once a person felt genuinely held and chosen by this community, the doctrine was much easier to absorb, and leaving became much harder. The same mechanism operates in individual relationships. A study by Strutzenberg and colleagues in 2017, looking at love bombing in young adult relationships, found its association with narcissistic traits in the person doing it, and with forms of insecure attachment in the person receiving it. The tactic is not always conscious. Sometimes the person doing it is genuinely experiencing an intense pull toward the other person and expressing it without strategic intent, but the effect is the same regardless of intent. An attachment forms faster than it would have naturally, at a depth the early stage of any relationship normally does not reach, and that attachment shapes everything that comes afterward. Because what love bombing creates is a baseline, a memory of how good it was, of how seen you were, of how much warmth existed between you. And when the warmth begins to withdraw, and it does withdraw, that memory becomes the thing you are working to recover. You want to get back to the beginning. You want to find what you did wrong that made the warmth disappear. You want to do the thing that will bring it back. And in that wanting, a particular kind of compliance is born. This is the beginning of the idealize, devalue, discard cycle that appears in clinical literature on narcissistic relationships. Idealization is the love bombing phase. The person is magnificent. The connection is special. You are extraordinary. Devaluation follows. The criticism arrives, not always dramatically. Sometimes it is quiet and consistent. You notice small corrections, subtle comparisons, the sense that you are disappointing in ways you cannot quite identify. The warmth does not vanish all at once. It withdraws in pulses, and each withdrawal sends you back toward whatever behavior seemed to precede the moments of warmth, trying to reproduce it, trying to earn back the version of them you first encountered. Discard is the final phase, though in many relationships it is not a final event but a threatened one, wielded and withdrawn and wielded again. The possibility of being discarded is its own engine of compliance. If you believe that one wrong move might end the relationship, and you want the relationship, or at least you want the version of the relationship that existed at the beginning, you move very carefully. You say less. You agree more. You monitor their mood constantly because their mood is weather that determines whether the warmth returns or the cold comes in. But here is the mechanism underneath all of this, the one that explains why leaving feels so much harder than it should feel from the outside. This is the slot machine connection, the one worth understanding in full. Boris Frederick Skinner, the behavioral psychologist who spent decades mapping how organisms learn through reinforcement, identified something about the structure of reward that turned out to be more powerful than anyone initially expected. Most of the time we imagine that reliable reward is more motivating than unreliable reward. If you want someone to keep doing a behavior, you reward them every time they do it. But Skinner found the opposite. A variable ratio reinforcement schedule, which means rewarding a behavior after an unpredictable variable number of responses, produces the most persistent behavior and the most extinction-resistant behavior of any reinforcement pattern he studied. The animal or the person does not know when the reward is coming. They only know it is coming sometimes. That uncertainty does not extinguish the behavior. It amplifies it. Because each time the reward fails to arrive, you cannot know whether it is coming next time, or the time after that, or the time after that. The only way to find out is to keep going. This is why slot machines are designed the way they are. The occasional win, unpredictable in its timing, produces behavior that is extraordinarily hard to stop, not in spite of the unreliability, but because of it. The win could be the next pull. You cannot know without trying. The hot and cold partner runs on exactly this schedule, whether they understand it or not. The warmth that appears after a cold period does not feel like manipulation. It feels like reward. It feels like the relationship you wanted returning. And because its arrival is unpredictable, because you cannot tell whether a given day will be a cold day or a warm day, the scanning never stops. You are always attending, always monitoring, always available to the possibility that this moment might be the one when the warmth comes back. The system keeps you more engaged, more attached, and more focused on the relationship than a consistently warm relationship would. This is what Patrick Carnes, who developed the concept of trauma bonding, described in terms of the neurological and psychological effects of cyclical harm and reconciliation. The cycle of tension and relief, of coldness and warmth, of cruelty and kindness does not produce detachment, it produces attachment. Strong, often desperate attachment that the people outside the relationship cannot understand, because from the outside, what they see is someone staying in something that is clearly not good for them, and they cannot see the slot machine. They cannot see that leaving is neurologically very similar to walking away from the machine when the win might be the next pull. Trauma bonding is not weakness, it is not stupidity, it is not a failure of character, it is a predictable psychological response to an unpredictable reinforcement pattern combined with genuine, intermittent harm. The bond forms most powerfully in conditions of both danger and relief, of harm and rescue, of deprivation and sudden warmth. And the person caught in it often knows, at some level, that the dynamic is not healthy. They have that knowledge, and they stay anyway, because the pull of the next possible warmth is stronger in that nervous system than the evidence of the pattern. Understanding this does not resolve it, but it changes the story of the person inside it. The story is not "you are foolish." The story is "you are human," and something was set up to exploit mechanisms that are built into human learning. That is a different story. It is a story worth telling yourself at 3 in the morning, when you are trying to understand why you cannot simply leave. Let us rest again for just a moment. Breathe. You do not need to hold all of this at once. Let it move through you the way water moves. Take what stays with you and let the rest float. Now the smaller tactics, not smaller in terms of harm, smaller only in that they are more contained, more easily named, and naming them is the beginning of seeing through them. Future faking is the promise that resets the clock. A commitment to change, a vision of what the relationship will be when things are better, when we get through this hard time, when I get this job, solve this problem, get through this season. The promise is offered with sincerity, or with something that looks like sincerity, at exactly the moment when you are closest to leaving or to demanding something different. And it works because hope is not foolishness. Hope is rational. If someone genuinely commits to something, giving them the time to deliver on it is not naive, it is fair. The problem is that future faking exploits the rationality of hope. The promise does not need to be kept, it only needs to be made with enough apparent authenticity to restart the clock. And the person receiving it is not wrong to believe it. They are responding reasonably to what looks like a genuine commitment. What they cannot see, and what only the pattern across time reveals, is that the promises never resolve into sustained change. They extend the timeline. They provide cover for the present by mortgaging a future that never quite arrives. This is why the pattern is the unit of evidence, not any single event. One unkept promise is a disappointment, a series of unkept promises that always arrive at exactly the right moment, that always buy exactly enough time, that always arrive again when the window is closing, is a tactic. The difference between a mistake and a strategy is repetition with result. Triangulation is the introduction of a third party into what should be a two-person dynamic. Sometimes the third party is named, "Everyone agrees with me, your sister thinks so too. I was talking to my mother about this, and she said the same thing I always say." Sometimes the third party is vague, people have noticed. The effect is to remove the conversation from a negotiation between two people and reframe it as you against a consensus. You are not just disagreeing with them. You are apparently at odds with a group whose opinion you also need to consider. In romantic relationships, triangulation often involves a specific person, an ex who is always somehow relevant, a coworker who appreciates them in ways you do not, a friend who finds them excellent company. The introduction of this person into the relationship is not incidental. Whether conscious or not, it activates insecurity, reactivates the fear of being discarded, and quietly realigns where your attention goes. Instead of examining the dynamic between you and your partner, you are now managing your anxiety about this third person. The original issue has moved again. Word salad is not a cruel metaphor. It is a descriptive term for a specific kind of argument that manipulators frequently deploy in response to direct confrontation. The conversation starts with a clear question or a clear concern, and then, very quickly, it becomes unclear. The argument circles back on itself. New points are introduced before the old ones are resolved. Your words from earlier in the conversation are used against you in ways that feel almost logical, but do not quite track. You pursue the thread of one argument and find it has dissolved and been replaced by another. You try to return to the original point and are told you are being obsessive, or bringing up old things, or refusing to listen. By the end of the conversation, you are exhausted, not the productive exhaustion of a hard argument that resolved something, the empty exhaustion of having turned in circles for an hour and arrived at nothing. That exhaustion is functional. A person who is exhausted is less likely to try again. The willingness to raise difficult subjects goes down with each failed attempt, not because the concern was unreasonable, but because the cost of trying keeps rising and the return on trying keeps falling. Moving the goalposts is what happens when you try to meet a standard and find, upon meeting it, that the standard has changed. You apologize and they want more than an apology. You change the behavior they criticized and they find a different behavior to criticize. You give more time and it is never quite enough time. You become quieter and you are accused of being withholding. You become more expressive and you are too much. The standard is not actually a standard. It is a moving target. And a moving target serves a very specific function. It keeps you always slightly insufficient. It keeps the sense of failure and therefore the desire to do better permanently alive. This connects to something about chronic criticism and its effect over time. A person who receives consistent criticism, particularly on subjective things like their personality, their emotionality, their way of expressing care, gradually internalizes that something about them is fundamentally off. This is not a conclusion they reach through evidence. It is a conclusion that seeps in through repetition, through the slow accumulation of implied wrongness, until self-doubt is not occasional, but continuous. They check themselves before speaking. They rehearse how things will land. They manage their own presentation constantly, expending enormous energy trying to be a version of themselves that will not draw criticism, which is exactly the kind of energy that might otherwise go toward evaluating the relationship clearly. The smear campaign is what often happens at the end of a manipulative relationship, or when someone within a social or professional environment begins to push back. Before you have been able to tell your story to the people around you, your story has already been told for you. They are worried about you. They have noticed changes. They have been holding their tongue about certain things they have observed. The framing is always delivered in the language of concern. People who care about you want you to know, but the effect is to preemptively undermine any account you might give of your own experience. The smear campaign does something subtle that goes beyond just damaging your reputation. It isolates you from the social support that might otherwise help you make sense of what is happening. If the people around you have already received a version of you as volatile, or unreliable, or troubled, your attempts to describe what you are experiencing become harder to be heard as straightforward reportage. The listener is already holding a frame, and the frame was placed there by someone who understood that controlling the first impression is much easier than rewriting the second one. The silent treatment is the withdrawal of presence as punishment. Not a request for space, not a clearly communicated need to process, but a specific withdrawal, sustained and unexplained, that leaves the other person filling the silence with their own anxiety and self-examination. The silent treatment does not address anything. It does not resolve anything. What it does is reorient the relationship so that your primary emotional project becomes earning back their presence. You apologize, you reach out, you try to figure out what you did, and in that reaching and figuring and apologizing, the power dynamic of the moment is very clearly established. Their silence is the authority. Your attempts to end it are the submission. And then there is charm, which needs to be said plainly because charm is what makes all of the other things possible. The consistent sequence documented across survivor accounts and clinical observation is this: the charm comes first, and it is real charm. Not performed charm in a detectable way, not suspicious charm, real warmth, real humor, real generosity, real attentiveness, the kind that makes other people say, "You are so lucky," or "I really like them," or "I have never seen you so happy." This is important to understand because the charm is load-bearing, it is not incidental. The trust it builds, the network of people who think well of them, the reputation for being good company and a good person, all of this becomes structural support for everything that follows. The people who love you most, your friends, your family, the ones you would go to if you needed to say, something is wrong, they have already met this person and formed a warm impression, which means your account of anything that contradicts that impression arrives against significant ambient resistance. That is not a coincidence. The charm was social infrastructure. People high in subclinical psychopathy, which again means ordinary people who function in normal settings and are not in any clinical category, score consistently higher than average on interpersonal charm and social facility. Not because they are performing something false, but because the social and emotional wiring that in other people creates inhibition, creates the uncomfortable feeling of affecting others, operates differently in them. The feedback loop that for many people makes certain kinds of manipulation feel bad, the discomfort of making someone feel insecure, the guilt of telling a partial truth, is quieter, which means the behavior is available in a way it simply is not available to most people. This is not to make them monsters. Monstrousness is the wrong frame. It is to make clear why intelligence does not protect you from them. Your intelligence reads the charm and accurately identifies it as real warmth, because it is. The warmth is not a disguise worn over something cold. The warmth and the coldness are both genuine, both available, and which one you encounter depends partly on what is needed and partly on circumstances that have nothing to do with you. The arc of charm before control is the reason so many people describe the moment of recognition, of first clearly seeing the pattern as disorienting in a specific way. It is not just that things are bad now, it is that the beginning was genuinely good. The beginning was not a trick in any simple sense. The warmth they felt in those early months was real warmth, and that makes the current reality harder to integrate, not easier. If the beginning had been terrible, leaving would be easier. Believing your own assessment would be easier, but you carry the memory of who they were when things were good, and that memory is true, and it makes you doubt the memory of who they are when things are not. Both things are true. They were warm then and they are cold now. They can be genuinely kind and genuinely cruel. The contradiction is the condition, not a reason to disbelieve either half of it. So we have been talking for most of this time together about the internal architecture of manipulation, how it is built, how it runs, how it roots itself so deeply that you stop trusting your own version of events. Now let us bring it down to the specific rooms where it happens, because the dynamics shift in subtle and important ways depending on where you are. At work, it looks different than it does in a marriage. In a family, it looks different again. The emotional register is not the same. The leverage is not the same. And what you can do about it is not entirely the same either. So let us walk through each one. In a workplace, the manipulation is almost always Machiavellian in its character. That word, Machiavellian, comes from Niccolo Machiavelli's 16th century treatise on political power, and in personality research it describes a specific consistent cluster, strategic thinking, emotional detachment in the pursuit of goals, a clear-eyed and somewhat cold belief that people are, ultimately, tools. The person who scores high on Machiavellianism is not necessarily charismatic in the explosive, overwhelming way of the grandiose narcissist. They may be perfectly pleasant, low-key, easy to work with in a surface sense. What they are, underneath the pleasantness, is calculating. They are thinking about where the power is, who has it, how to get closer to it, and what each person around them is useful for. The patterns this produces at work are specific and recognizable once you know to look for them. Credit taking is one of the most common. It rarely looks like outright theft of your work. What it looks like is something more slippery. You contribute an idea in a meeting. It is not acknowledged. 2 days later, the same idea surfaces from someone else's mouth, someone with more status or a closer relationship with the person who decides things. And now it lands beautifully. And the credit attaches to the person who restated it rather than to you. You sit there uncertain. Did they get the idea from you? Did they come to it independently? Was it even really your idea to begin with? The fog is the point. The fog is not a side effect. It is the mechanism. Plausible deniability, the capacity to offer an alternative, innocent explanation for every single move, is the Machiavellian's structural advantage. You cannot point to a lie. You cannot name a theft. What you can name is a pattern, and the pattern is that your contributions consistently fail to surface as yours, that the person in question consistently benefits from proximity to your work, and that any individual instance can always be explained away. Information control is the companion tactic. The Machiavellian coworker understands, often without ever articulating it to themselves, that information is a form of currency. They know what you do not. They share selectively. They are present in the conversations that matter and absent from the ones that don't, and they are the one who decides quietly which category each conversation falls into. You find out about things after decisions have already been made. You are copied on emails late or not at all, and when you mention it, there is a perfectly reasonable explanation. The email chain got long, they thought someone else had looped you in, they are so sorry. The explanation is always plausible. The pattern is always the same. Triangulation shows up here too, though it takes a professional shape. Instead of bringing in a romantic rival, the Machiavellian coworker brings in professional opinion, always framed as third-party consensus. People have been saying, there's a general sense in the team that, I've heard from a few people that, you never find out who these people are. When you ask, the framing shifts. I don't want to put anyone in an uncomfortable position. It sounds considerate. It functions as a way of delivering criticism with no source you can interrogate, no conversation you can have, no specific misunderstanding you can address. You are left with a vague, attributed to nobody impression of how you are perceived, and no way to test whether it is real. The internal state audit signals at work tend to be quieter versions of the ones you'd notice in a closer relationship. You start rehearsing conversations before they happen, playing out how things might be twisted or misrepresented. You are careful about what you say and to whom in a way that goes beyond ordinary professional judgment. You notice yourself over-documenting, not because your job requires it, but because somewhere in you there is a felt need to have a record. You feel a vague anxiety around certain people that you cannot explain to a colleague without sounding paranoid. You've begun to second-guess your own competence in a way you didn't before, even though your actual performance hasn't changed. These are signals. Trust them as data. One thing that makes the workplace version particularly difficult is that the normal corrective measures, talking it through, naming what you observe, appealing to fairness, can easily be turned against you. If you raise a concern and the person you are raising it about is more liked, more senior, or more politically positioned than you, the Darvo pattern can play out at an organizational level. you become the difficult one, the one who can't work well with others, the one making accusations. The Machiavellian coworker does not need to engineer this overtly. They only need to respond to any confrontation with sufficient wounded hurt and plausible alternative framing, and the social system will often do the rest. This is why document first, escalate carefully. If you need to raise something formally, you want to raise it with specifics, dates, emails, the words that were actually said, rather than with a feeling, because a feeling can be reframed as sensitivity and a specific record cannot. The goal at work is usually not to win a moral argument. It is to protect yourself, establish a clear record, and where possible, limit the leverage the other person has over your professional life. Now let us move to a closer room, the one behind the front door. In a romantic partnership, the manipulation tends to involve more of the full, dark triad spectrum, but the dimension that does the most structural damage, the most quiet and lasting rewriting of reality, tends to be the narcissistic end, and specifically the interplay between the love bombing phase and what follows it. We talked earlier about love bombing, the flooding of attention and affection in the early stages of a relationship, the daily contact, the intensity, the sense of being seen and chosen and extraordinary. We talked about intermittent reinforcement, the variable ratio schedule that makes unpredictable reward the most powerful behavioral hook there is. And we talked about the idealized value-discard cycle that gives a relationship with a narcissistic partner its characteristic terrible rhythm. What we have not yet talked about is isolation, because isolation is the mechanism that makes all of the others harder to escape. Isolation in a romantic relationship almost never begins as an obvious thing. Nobody announces that they are going to separate you from the people who would otherwise give you a reality check. What happens is smaller than that and more gradual. They don't like one of your friends. There is always a specific reason, and the reason usually has something true in it, because the best leverage always contains something real. Your friend can be self-absorbed, and they notice it. Your sister can be judgmental, and they name it. These are not lies. They are partial truths weaponized as reasons to see those people less, to rely on them less, to stop telling them things that might prompt an outside perspective on the relationship. Your world narrows, not in one decision, in dozens of small ones, each of which seemed reasonable at the time, and then you find one day that the only person you really talk to is the person who is also the source of the confusion, the person whose account of reality has been quietly replacing yours, the person whose version of events has been treated, in every conflict, as the authoritative one. This is coercive control, and it is important enough that we need to stop here and be precise about it. Coercive control is a framework developed in particular by the researcher and advocate Evan Stark, who argued, in his 2007 book on the subject, that the most serious forms of partner abuse are not best understood as discrete violent incidents, but as a sustained pattern of domination, a pattern that involves isolation, monitoring of daily life, control over finances, micro-regulation of behavior, and the systematic dismantling of a person's autonomy and outside connections. In England and Wales, coercive control became a criminal offence under the Serious Crime Act of 2015. Scotland followed in 2018. The legal recognition matters because it names formally that the pattern is the unit of harm, not the argument last Tuesday, the pattern across the months and years. This distinction, pattern, not incident, is one of the most important things you can take from this conversation, because so much of what happens when we try to process a confusing relationship is that we evaluate each incident individually. That argument, was it bad enough? That comment, was it really that hurtful? The isolation, did I choose some of that myself? And the answer to each individual question is always muddy, always arguable, always available for an alternative explanation. But if you zoom out and look at the full shape of your life inside this relationship, the trajectory is legible in a way the individual moments are not. Is your world smaller than it was? Do you have fewer conversations with people outside the relationship? Do you find yourself editing what you say to friends because you're not sure how it will reflect on your partner or on you? Do you have less access to money than you once did, or have financial decisions shifted in ways you didn't fully choose? Do you feel, in a general and hard-to-locate way, like you need permission for things you used to simply do? Those are the questions Evan Stark's framework is built to ask. They are uncomfortable questions. They are worth sitting with. Trauma bonding deepens all of this. The term comes from the work of Patrick Carnes and describes the strong, often paradoxical, emotional attachment that forms in relationships characterized by cycles of harm and reconciliation. The cycle, warmth, then cold, then harm, then repair, produces a bond that is stronger than the bond formed in a consistently warm relationship. This sounds counterintuitive. It should be the opposite. And yet the research and the experiences of an enormous number of people confirm it. The relief of the repair phase, the gratitude of being returned to, the chemical reality of stress hormones followed by bonding hormones, the way the good times feel more vivid because the bad times have been so dark. These things wire attachment in deep and hard-to-undo ways. This is why just leave is such an inadequate response to someone in a relationship like this. The bond is not irrational, it is the natural result of a specific set of conditions. Conditions that, from the outside, look like a bad situation, and from the inside feel like the most important relationship in your life. Both of those things are simultaneously true. When to seek outside support in a romantic context is not always obvious from inside. The internal state signals we have been walking through, the constant self-doubt, the fogginess after conversations, the apologizing for things you can't name, the rehearsed conversations, the narrowed world, are the earliest, most reliable indication that something is off. But if the pattern has progressed to include monitoring of your communications, control over your finances, physical isolation enforced rather than drifted into, or any physical intimidation, those are the signals that what is happening has a name in law, and that the resources you need are not just therapeutic, but practical. Coercive control organizations, domestic abuse hotlines, legal advocates. These exist precisely because the internal resources of the person inside the pattern are often the first thing the pattern dismantles. You are not weak for having gotten to this point. The system worked exactly as it was designed to. Now, the third room, the oldest one. Family is where manipulation has the longest roots because family is where the original ground rules were laid. The family context is also where the covert, vulnerable narcissist does their most sustained and least visible work. We talked about the difference between grandiose and vulnerable narcissism. The grandiose type is the loud one, dominant, charming, self-promoting, obviously large in a room. The vulnerable type is quieter. They operate through fragility, through suffering, through the accumulated weight of what they have given and endured and sacrificed, which is always somehow your responsibility to acknowledge and repay. If you grew up with a parent who operated this way, you may not have a language for it, because the manipulation was the water you swam in. It did not feel like manipulation. It felt like family. It felt like love. The obligation felt like love. The guilt felt like a signal of how much you cared. The walking on eggshells felt like sensitivity, like being a good child. The scripts that run in these families are specific, and once you hear them named, startlingly recognizable. After everything I've done for you. This sentence carries enormous weight because it is almost never untrue. Parents do sacrifice for children. The manipulation is not in the existence of the sacrifice. It is in the accounting of it, the deployment of it as leverage, the way it appears precisely when you are attempting to make a choice that centers your own needs. The sacrifice becomes a debt. The love becomes a loan. You're breaking up the family. This one appears when you attempt to establish distance, to name a dynamic, to request a change. It frames your self-protection as aggression, your boundary as violence. It puts the responsibility for family cohesion on the person attempting to maintain their own.
I don't know what I'd do without you. This is the helplessness play. It is often entirely genuine. The person saying it may experience genuine distress at the idea of your independence. But its function, regardless of its sincerity, is to make your independence feel dangerous, to make your needs feel like a threat.
Role assignments in these families are also worth naming. The golden child is the one who meets the family system's needs, who excels in the approved ways, who validates the parent's self-image, who is protected and idealized. The scapegoat is the one who carries what the family cannot integrate: the conflict, the failure, the shadow. If you were the scapegoat, you may have grown up with a profound sense that you were the problem in the family, without being able to articulate why, without any memory of deciding to be difficult. You were assigned a role. The role was maintained through selective perception, through a consistent narrative about who you were, through the other members of the family reflecting that narrative back at you in 10,000 small and large ways. Leaving these dynamics, even just psychologically, is complicated in ways that workplace or even romantic manipulation is not, because the attachment involved is the first attachment, the one formed before language, the one that shaped before you had any capacity to evaluate it, your sense of what relationships feel like, what you deserve, what love requires of you. Undoing that early wiring is not a weekend project. It is a years-long, often therapy-assisted process of learning to recognize the scripts as scripts rather than as truth. And one of the first and most important steps in that process is simply naming what the role was, not to assign blame, not to hold a trial, but to understand that the child you were did not deserve the assignment you received. The scapegoat did not generate their own scapegoating. The person walking on eggshells was not born with unreasonable anxiety. These were responses to conditions, they were adaptations, they were the most intelligent thing you could do in the situation you were in. You were not the problem, you were responding to one. Now, let us talk about what you can actually do, because this is the part of the conversation that matters most, and it is the part that most other treatments of this subject get wrong, either by being too confrontational, just call them out and walk away, or too passive, you just have to accept people for who they are, or too vague, set boundaries, full stop, as if that were a plan rather than a destination. The first and most foundational thing is the one we have been building toward this entire time. Audit your internal states, not their intentions, not their behavior, yours. This is the pivot the whole conversation has been pointing to, because you have been told, implicitly or explicitly, that detecting manipulation is a matter of reading the other person, catching the lie, spotting the tell, seeing through the charm. And as we established at the beginning of this with Bond and DePaulo's 2006 meta-analysis sitting behind us, humans detect lies at about 54% accuracy, just barely better than a coin flip. You are not going to catch a skilled manipulator by watching them closely. That is not a limitation of your intelligence, it is a feature of how skilled manipulation works. The whole architecture is built to be unreadable in the moment, but your internal states are not hidden from you. You have access to them, and they leave a pattern. Are you apologizing more than you used to? Not for specific things, generally reflexively for taking up space, for having a different memory of events, for your own emotional reactions? Are you mentally rehearsing conversations before they happen? Not to be thoughtful, but to brace for impact, to pre-manage the twisting that you have learned to expect? Are you foggy after certain interactions in a way you cannot quite account for? Not tired from a long conversation, uncertain about what just happened, unsure of what was said, what was decided, whether you agreed to something or whether it was simply declared to be the case? Are you keeping records, screenshots of texts, notes after phone calls, a private log of what was said when, not because you are an evidence hoarder by nature, but because some part of you has learned that without a record, your memory will be disputed, your version will be replaced, and you will stand there in the next argument uncertain of your own past? The record keeping is a very specific signal. It is your nervous system's quiet acknowledgement, before your conscious mind has caught up, that you are operating in a reality that is not reliable. Has your world gotten smaller? Not in a way you can trace to one decision. In the way that water finds a level, gradually without drama, until one day you notice that you do not call the people you used to call, that you have stopped mentioning certain subjects to certain friends because it is easier, that the people who knew you before this period of your life feel farther away, and you are not entirely sure how. Do you feel obligated in ways you cannot trace to anything you actually agreed to? You owe something. You are not sure what. You are not sure when you agreed to owe it. But the weight of it is there, diffuse and constant, informing your behavior in ways you would struggle to fully articulate. These are the signals, not what they did last Tuesday, what you have been doing for months. That is the data. The second thing, document privately, build your own reality record. This is not about building a legal case, though it may eventually serve all one. It is about restoring your epistemic ground, your ability to know what actually happened and to stand in that knowledge when it is disputed. Write down what was said as close to the conversation as you can. Date it. Note how you felt afterward. Note the pattern you are beginning to see. You are not paranoid for doing this. You are doing the thing your nervous system has already been trying to do on your behalf. The third thing, stop trying to win the argument. This is one of the hardest because it runs against every instinct you have, and especially against the instinct of the intelligent, fair-minded person who believes that if you can just explain it clearly enough, the other person will understand. If you have been in a relationship, romantic, professional, familial, with someone who uses manipulation as a primary mode, you have already had the experience of explaining clearly and being met not with understanding, but with a redirect, a counter-accusation, a sudden shift in what the argument was even about. You have had the experience of circular conversations that last 2 hours and leave nothing resolved, except that you are exhausted and have said several things in the heat of it that will be held against you later. This is what therapists and researchers call jade: justify, argue, defend, explain. Jade is the trap. When you jade, when you try to justify your position, argue its merits, defend yourself against the counter-accusations, explain your reasoning, you are accepting the premise that your right to your position is still under debate, that it requires their validation to be legitimate, and that a long enough argument might produce it. It will not. The person who uses these patterns is not looking for understanding. They are looking for the argument itself, which is a mechanism of control. The argument keeps you engaged. It keeps you off balance. It produces, eventually, the exhausted capitulation that looks like agreement. The alternative to jade is short, non-reactive, repeated. I'm not going to discuss this further tonight. Not because you won't listen, not because you always do this, not a list of the ways they have been unfair. Just, I'm not discussing this further tonight, and then not discussing it. The broken record technique is not satisfying in the way that winning an argument would be satisfying, but the argument cannot be won. The technique is designed for the argument that cannot be won. You are not conceding by not arguing. You are removing yourself from a system that is designed to exhaust you. The fourth thing, grey rock. The grey rock method, which circulates widely in therapeutic, popular writing, though it has not been subjected to controlled study in the way that, say, intermittent reinforcement has, describes a specific behavioral posture, making yourself as uninteresting as possible as a target. Flat, dull, unreactive. The metaphor is a grey rock on a beach, indistinguishable from the other grey rocks, not worth picking up. The logic behind it is sound, even if the experimental validation is thin. Manipulation, especially the narcissistic and psychopathic variants, is in significant part driven by the reward of your reaction. The fear, the hurt, the anger, the capitulation. These are forms of emotional supply. They confirm influence. When you stop providing them, when your responses to provocations are flat and boring and give nothing to work with, you become a less rewarding target. You do not stop being a target, but you become a less interesting one. And in many contexts, particularly workplace contexts or family context where full exit is not immediately possible, becoming boring is a meaningful form of protection. The caution with grey rock is that it requires you to suppress your genuine emotional responses in real time, which is a form of labor and has its own cost. It is a tactic for when other options are not available, not a permanent state to inhabit. The fifth thing, reframe what a boundary is. The word boundary gets used so often in therapeutic culture that it has started to lose its meaning. People imagine a boundary as a wall or as a demand, or as a line you draw and dare someone to cross. Manipulators are very good at crossing lines they have been dared to cross. They are very good at making the drawing of the line the thing that is wrong. Why are you being so rigid? I can't believe you'd put conditions on our relationship. That's not a very loving thing to say. A boundary, practically speaking, is not a statement about what they will or will not do. It is a statement about what you will or will not do. The difference sounds small. It is not. You can't talk to me that way is an invitation to prove you wrong. If you talk to me that way, I'm going to end the conversation is a description of your own behavior that does not depend on their agreement or compliance. One is a request for them to change. One is information about you. The second one you can actually follow through on. The second one does not require them to do anything at all. And the second one cannot be darvoed as easily because you have made no accusation. You have simply described what you will do. The follow-through is the boundary. The statement is just preamble. If you say you will end the conversation and then do not, you have not set a boundary. You have renegotiated it downward. Consistency is everything here, and consistency is hard, particularly with people who are very good at finding the moment when your resolve is lowest. This is why the sixth thing matters: reconnect the narrowed network. Part of what makes these patterns so sustaining is that they do their best work in isolation. The outside perspective, a friend who knew you before, a family member who can see what has changed, a therapist who has no stake in the outcome, is a genuine threat to the rewritten reality. Which is why, in close relationships with people who operate this way, the outside connections tend to erode. Sometimes through active discouragement, sometimes through the sheer weight of the relationship which takes all your emotional energy and leaves nothing for others. Sometimes because you have stopped talking honestly about the relationship out of loyalty or shame, or the exhausting difficulty of explaining it to someone who wasn't there. Reconnecting does not have to be a dramatic declaration. It can be a phone call, it can be coffee, it can be sending the message you have been drafting and deleting for 3 weeks. The goal is not to assemble a coalition against anyone. The goal is to restore your own access to outside reality, to have people in your life who see you whole, who knew you before, who can offer you a reflection that is not filtered through one person's interests. The seventh thing, and one of the most important, know the difference between de-escalation and self-erasure. De-escalation is a skill. It involves choosing in a high-tension moment not to match the energy, not to push back in a way that will escalate the conflict, not to say the thing that is true but will make everything worse right now. De-escalation is choosing the timing and the method of a conversation rather than having it at the worst possible moment with the worst possible emotional charge. Self-erasure is something different. Self-erasure is when you stop having the conversation entirely, not choosing the right moment, abandoning the claim, not moderating your tone, abandoning your position, not protecting the relationship by being careful, protecting the relationship by becoming smaller. The two things can feel identical in the moment, which is part of what makes them so easy to confuse. Both involve restraint. Both involve not saying what you might otherwise say. But one is strategic patience and one is the end of yourself as a negotiating party in your own life. The question to ask is this a delay or is this a surrender? Am I choosing when and how, or am I choosing never? And finally, you do not have to have certainty before you seek help. You do not have to be certain that the word manipulation applies, certain that the pattern rises to a level that counts, certain that you are not overreacting or being unfair. Uncertainty is part of the design. If you could be certain, you would already have acted. The uncertainty itself is the mechanism. What matters is not certainty about them. It is noticing your own consistent internal states, the apologizing you can't account for, the fogginess after the conversations, the shrinking world, the feeling that you are always just about to understand what you did wrong, but never quite getting there. Those things do not require certainty about the other person. They require attention to yourself. A therapist, a counselor, a trusted outside person who has no stake in the outcome, these are not resources you access after you have proven a case. They are resources you access when the weight of not knowing has become heavier than the discomfort of telling someone what has been happening. You are allowed to tell someone what has been happening. Let us pause here for a moment. Take a slow breath in. Let it settle into your chest, your rib cage, your belly. Hold it for just a beat and release. Notice if something has shifted, even the smallest degree, even just the weight of having named some things that perhaps did not have names until now. When you are ready, we will come to the end together. Because there is something important, something that is perhaps the most important thing in this whole conversation that has not yet been said plainly.
None of what we have talked about tonight means that you are broken. Not the apologizing, not the fogginess, not the self-doubt, not the fact that you did not catch the pattern sooner or that you excused things that in retrospect seem obvious. Not the fact that you defended someone who did not deserve it, or stayed somewhere longer than was good for you, or found yourself confused by a person you should, by any rational measure, have been able to read.
You did not fail a test of intelligence. The tactics we have walked through, the variable ratio reinforcement, the reality rewriting, the manufactured obligation, the Darvo inversion, the charm before control sequence, these are not tricks that only the naive fall for. They target the social emotional architecture that every human being carries, regardless of education or experience. The person who falls for intermittent reinforcement is using the same neurological reward circuitry as the person who cannot walk away from a slot machine. And you would not call that person stupid for finding it hard. You are not stupid, you are not weak, you are, most likely, someone who had a capacity for loyalty, for repair, for giving people the benefit of the doubt, and those qualities were used against you. They were the specific qualities that made you a more useful target than someone who had given up on people entirely. The manipulation required something good in you to work with. That is not a failure. That is a description of how the mechanism operates. The shame that settles over people who recognize these patterns in their own histories. The shame of, how did I not see this? How did I let this go on? What does it say about me that this happened? Is itself one of the things that keeps the pattern running, because shame is isolating, and isolation is what the whole architecture requires. The moment you bring it into light, the moment you name it to another person, the moment you stop holding the confusion privately as if it were evidence against you rather than evidence of what has been done to you, that is the moment the architecture begins to lose its grip. You were not imagining it. What happened was real, whatever it was. Your body knew before your mind did. Your nervous system was keeping records even when you were not. The fact that you are here, still thinking about it, still trying to understand it, that is not weakness. That is the beginning of something. There are people who spend decades trying to understand why they felt a certain way in a certain relationship, or why they cannot trust their own judgment now the way they once could, and they never find a frame that makes sense of it. If something in this conversation has offered that frame, or even a corner of it, then you have something you did not have before. A name for the fog, a name for the cycle, a name for the inversion that made you into the problem, a name for the warmth that was real and the coldness that was also real, and the fact that both can be true at once. Patterns are legible. They are legible even when individual moments are not. And you are allowed to look at the full shape of your own experience and trust what you see. There is a line that has stayed with me working through all of this, and I want to leave it with you as we close. It is simply this. The person who is genuinely confused about whether they are being manipulated is almost never the manipulator. The manipulator is not confused. They know what they are doing, whether they would name it that way or not. The confusion, the self-doubt, the loop of maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm the problem, maybe I'm being unfair, that belongs to the target. It is a signature of the position, not of the person. If you are confused, it is most likely because something genuinely confusing has been happening to you. Take that with you, not as a weapon, not as a verdict, as a small piece of solid ground to stand on while you figure out the rest. You have been carrying something heavy. You are allowed to put it down somewhere, even just for tonight. You are allowed to not solve this tonight. You are allowed to simply know a little more than you knew before, that what has been happening to you has a shape, and that shape is not your fault, and that there are names for it, and that you are not imagining it. Sleep well. One last sleepy beat before the dark. Good night.